Good afternoon and welcome to today's Webinar Wednesday session with the Library Corporation. My name is Jameson Reynolds and I'm the Director of Marketing Strategy with TLC. With me, we have a couple of guests for today's panel discussion. We have John Burns, who is TLC COO, and we have Justin Dualzonizer, or DZ as he's known around the office, as he is our CTO. And we're here to talk today about TLC Cloud Services. Thank you for joining us. We do try to keep these sessions at about a half hour, but this one might run a little bit longer, depending on how the discussion goes. I will let everybody know on this session that we are recording this, so you will be able to view this at a later time. We typically post these the day after the session takes place. In addition to that, you have the opportunity to submit questions to us. As we go through in our discussion, we will see these questions, and if we can work them in as we go, we will. Or what we will do is we'll wait towards the end and we'll try to have a session if there's time to allot for the questions that do come in. Before we get started, I actually do want to read today's description for today's webinar so everyone knows what it is that we're here to talk about today. TLC has teamed up with Oracle to redefine hosting library services. We would like to introduce you to TLC Cloud Services, an improved hosting platform. TLC Cloud Services utilizes Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI, to provide our customers with unmatched control, security, and predictability to deliver high performance. Cloud-based infrastructure services. OCI is a deep and broad platform of cloud services that enables TLC to design and build our applications in a scalable, secure, highly available, fault-tolerant, and high-performance environment. Our current products offering TLC Cloud Services include CarlX, Library.Solution, and Library.Solution for Schools. TLC offers ILS hosting in multiple regions of North America and globally, providing support for regions and countries who prefer or require local data residency. So that's where we are. This is what we're going to talk about today. Before we get into the content, if I could please, our panelists, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment or so and introduce yourself and maybe talk about your history with TLC a little bit. So John, let's start with you.
Thank you, Jameson, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I have 20 years, a little bit more than 20 years experience with TLC, and I've really built my career here, occupying a range of roles within the organization, primarily within the sales and marketing capacities. I have recently, been promoted to COO as of January, February of 2020. Before that, I was Director of Sales and Marketing.
All right, and I'm Justin Dualzonizer, and as Jameson said, most people shorten that to DZ, so if anybody says DZ, they're talking about me. I originally worked at the Library Corporation from 2003 to about 2006. One of my early technology jobs, I was actually a software trainer for Library.Solution, one of our ILS products, and I got drafted out of that position to move into technical product management. I had kind of a computer science background at that point. And in 2006, I left and spent a little bit over a decade working on kind of global supply chain and reverse supply chain solutions, also in a technical product management capacity. And then I came back about 3 years ago to take the Chief Technology Officer position. And one of the things that I've worked on, cloud platform migration, transition, other things in the past were sort of directly relevant to this project.
Awesome, thanks guys. I look forward to the conversation that we're about to have. And before we really get into what OCI is now, TLC's history with hosting is definitely not beginning with our OCI work and our OCI initiative. So John, if you wouldn't mind, could you kind of give everyone a history of TLC's relationship with hosting?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, I'll just tidy up my my bio with a personal element. And I'm sorry I didn't do this originally, but my background, the reason that I'm here is really my mother was a librarian in both the K-12 and public library systems. And as irony has it, and I like to share this in presentations I used to do, technology forced my mother into early retirement in the library industry because she was the old school, book battle, kids reading books. And then here her son is, 30 years later doing a webinar on OCI and technology and libraries. So that's the way the world turns sometimes. But having said that, again, it's a pleasure to be here. TLC has a very long history, 46 plus years of innovation in the library technology space. And we have been hosting content really since 1985. Our original product, data product, was Bibliophile, which you've probably heard of. That platform was based on microfiche originally, which moved to CD-ROM, and the early adopter. Of course, you may or may not know, TLC was the first company in the world to use the CD-ROM format for data purposes and not audio formats. And that bibliophile product, once the internet became viable, and that's a relative term considering where we are today, in 1985, that product moved from CD-ROMs to online in 1985. And that content was delivered at a blistering 48 baud per second via the old cradle modem that you would put your receiver, your phone receiver into. And that was an online database of the Library of Congress records. And that was kind of the first content, digital content that we hosted from our corporate headquarters here. You know, since that time, we've developed numerous technologies and systems. Most importantly, related to this conversation, our ILS platform in the mid-90s. So in 1985, we moved from CD-ROMs to dial-up technology online hosting. In 1995, TLC was the first vendor in the world to build an ILS system natively from the ground up for the Microsoft Server operating system. And those are the old NT servers, if you remember the old NT. So LS was built from the ground up with NT in mind. It was the first system natively designed for that Microsoft operating platform. At that time, our relationship with Oracle began in 1995, really 1994 or 5-ish, where SQL or SQL at the time had a 2 gig capacity limit. It had a ceiling of 2 gigabytes. And our clients at that time, even, we needed more room in our RDBMS. And Oracle provided that to us. And Oracle in 1995 was the high performance RDBMS, and I would attest to this day can still claim hold to that title. So our relationship with Oracle began in 95 with Library.Solution. In 2005, and you'll notice a trend here in kind of decade increments. In 2005, we began hosting our first customers who were LS client server-based applications. We began hosting those internally in our corporate hosting facility here at HQ. And then in 2010, after the growth, and we realized that hosting business based on demand in the market was really going to pick up, we moved our hosting services, our colo services, offsite to a tier 3 AT&T facility in Ashburn, Virginia, which you may not know as well. Northern Virginia here, which is about 45 miles as the crow flies from where I stand, is really the nexus of data center hosting in this country. And the Reston area, if you will, and that's where our current hosting facility is located. And again, a tier 3 facility where we leverage the infrastructure, the redundant ISPs, and other attributes of that facility, the secureness to host our enterprise system. Fast forward to 2020, and we are making the move to OCI and moving away from that third-party hosting center, which is more of a colo model, to a true cloud model with OCI, leveraging the power, the scalability, both internally and externally for our customer base. And I'll let DZ go into more detail about that because that's his bailiwick. But from a business perspective, we are very comfortable in our strategic move towards the OCI cloud. It aligns with our company history. It aligns with the innovation that we've been doing. And since our ILS systems, both of which, Library.Solution and CarlX, utilize the high performance enterprise database edition of Oracle, where else should we host but Oracle Cloud to maximize the efficiency and leverage the scalability and power of the Oracle RDBMS?
Yeah, and if I could continue on where
thanks, Sean. And Justin, I was going to say, if you could continue on with that, that would be good.
Yeah, for sure. So, and John really talked about that part of that kind of selection process for us in terms of cloud platform partners. We've had a very good long relationship with Oracle, but one of the other considerations there is what is the premium operating environment for the Oracle-based product that we use extensively in both of our ILS systems and many of our internal applications. And it's a similar value proposition to what a lot of customers like about our hosting solution as well, which is, we often say, if you're looking for somebody to host your Library.Solution product and keep it running optimally, keep on top of backup, data recovery, performance, monitoring security, all the things that you want out of a kind of IT service provider Basically, no one is ever going to deliver better than us the knowledge, expertise at a really low level of our own product, right? And so you can really extend that value proposition to what we're doing with Oracle as well. As John described, the advantage that we take of the Oracle database, really no one is ever going to beat Oracle at the most performant, most secure, most integrated operating environment for Oracle-based products. So that's a really compelling reason to partner up there on top of all kinds of other good benefits I'm sure we'll talk about here.
Thanks, Justin. And I will say before we get any further, I can't remember if I mentioned this at the beginning or not. As we do go through this session, there will be a couple of poll questions that do get asked as we go through. I'm not sure if now would be a great time for the first one, but I did want to point out that if you are watching this, there will be some poll questions that will pop up on your screen. And I kind of want to bring that up, DZ, because if I can go back just for a minute, with everything that John said, with everything that you said, there may be some folks on this call that may not know the difference between what on-premises is versus, we use the term colo or hosted versus cloud. Could you kind of give a quick breakdown on the difference between those three key ingredients there?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great, and you'll hear these terms in the webinar. You'll see them in a lot of our publication as well. So I think it's good to have a good survey for those. Some of you may be familiar with these, and my description will be frustratingly high level, but we're trying to keep it at a good general summary level here. So we historically library.solution was deployed as an on-premise solution, and that's really customer on-premise, meaning the library would provide some servers either at their location or some kind of county city location, depending on the customer type, and they would purchase that hardware, they would set up the servers, and we would install the software there and support it. So they're running it locally, and we provide a huge amount of support in that model, but they're really responsible for the infrastructure, the operating infrastructure. That means also keeping on top of the hardware procurement cycle to replace that, having spares available if things fail, making sure that the backups succeed, et cetera. So that on-premise is really the customer responsible for managing that hardware environment. And of course, we provide a lot of value add on the software management side. So that's kind of what we call the on-premise model. The colo really, and I'll briefly describe kind of like the three major generations, and this is going to gloss over a lot of internal improvements, but the three major generations of the hosted solution are Gen 1, as John talked about, is we stood up a pretty strong data center out of our corporate HQ when we got the initial customer demand to start offering these kind of hosted managed hardware services. And that was really a model where we procured physical rack-mounted hardware blades, if you're familiar with those, principally 1U, some 2U units, and set up big racks and basically built our own miniature data center out of HQ there. And all of the customers were using those physical hardware deployments, and then we just managed a replacement cycle, spares, performance, et cetera. As John indicated, at some point the demand for that really exceeded our capacity to host that model and would eventually limit our growth. So obviously we made this pivot before it would become capacity critical, and we moved to the co-location model. And that co-location model means we are still responsible for the hardware, the network implementation of everything locally. But the data center facility, meaning the power infrastructure, security infrastructure, and the connectivity to the public internet and private tunnels, is managed by the owner of that facility. And those are really your sort of corporate data centers, right? So, and as John described, those tend to be for a bunch. I won't geek out on all the disaster recovery stuff here, but for a bunch of reasons, those tend to be very clustered around certain areas that are out of critical flight paths, flood safety, low tectonic plate activity. There's a whole bunch of considerations. So when you check all the lists for that, those co-location facilities, there's a limited number of places that are optimal to host them. And our co-location data center facility on the East Coast is in one of those kind of prime spots. So that's the co-location model. And the main change between the Gen 1 and the Gen 2 there is moving to virtualization. So we still acquire and manage a large amount of hardware and infrastructure in that environment that's TLC owned, where we're more leasing the capacity and the facility for the rest of that. But at that point, we move to a virtualization model where we're abstracting away the underlying hardware, although still responsible for that. And the real transition in terms of how that changes with the Generation 3 with moving to TLC Cloud Services on OCI is, we sort of transition away from the direct management of the underlying hardware and infrastructure. And it still operates in a kind of an expanded virtualization model, but we're very much more responsible for the operating environment and the software environment, and move to a higher level of abstraction away from dealing with underlying storage and redundancy and fault tolerance and that kind of thing.
Awesome, thanks, Justin. Now, John, now that we're up to moving into OCI, if I could ask you, why did TLC choose to move to OCI as opposed to someone else in that space like AWS or Azure?
Yeah, I mean, instinctively, our first as we did a marketplace assessment and evaluation of cloud providers, instinctively we gravitated towards Oracle, but we definitely, we were aware of our bias, and we also cognizantly tried to mitigate that bias by remaining objective as we evaluated potential cloud offerings. But I mean, it's really apparent if you're using Oracle RDBMS as your backend database. That again, as DZ succinctly stated, who better to provide the hosting and cloud solution than the database provider. And aside from that, just the RDBMS, as we look to the market at large, Oracle, though it is a premium offering and at times, and not in every model, it typically comes at a little higher price point than some of the others you mentioned. And specifically AWS, Azure. Google was still, Google not quite mature enough really for us in terms of where we wanted to go. And then, back to the carve out there with OCI is, running the Oracle database, having the, 20+ year relationship with Oracle, it just made sense. And in both of our ILSs, again, run Oracle databases. Carl X as well. Carl started out, of course, as some you may or may not know, on the Tandem mainframe operating system, and we migrated them, and that was a multi-step migration from Tandem, which through time became a bit overkill in the library marketplace. But we migrated, we shifted Carl to Carl's solution, which was a Unix on Solaris, and then with Oracle, and made that shift out of Tandem into Oracle at that time. So both of our ILSs use the Oracle backend for the database. It made sense from a cloud provider to continue that relationship. And we're really happy overall with the performance comparisons that we did in evaluating the markets in terms of not only just operational efficiency, but scalability and overall performance for our end users, which is a snappy responsive system that they don't have to worry about, and then we don't have to worry about as much as DZ alluded to in maintaining the hardware. We can focus more on software versus maintaining SANs and DR processes, if you will, or infrastructure for that. Offload that to OCI where they have the scale, and that's their business. Library software and technology is our business, and that's where our expertise lies. And the more we can apply our resources towards that, the better off we are, the better off our clients are as a result.
Justin, let me go ahead and I kind of want to follow up with that with you, because we've kind of gone through the history and we've gotten to where we are now. What I think a lot of folks on the call are going to want to know is everything that we're talking about right now, how does this directly affect you if you're a TLC customer? And what I love about being able to ask this question is I'm asking it in the context of as a TLC customer, because many times I think people think to parse that out as whether we're speaking about library.solution for schools, or Carl X. So really, how does this affect everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I will attempt to weave in an answer to the great audience question that we got here, and see if I can hit both notes as we go. So just there's a question from the audience here. Co-location still sounds like the equipment will be on premise, just the database portion operating in a hosted format. So that Gen 2 co-location in the facility, apologies if I didn't make that clear. Both the software installation and the database, which is part of that software install, run on the virtualized hardware in the data center. And in the case of library.solution, that's based out of the Ashburn facility. In the case of the CarlX product, that's based out of a facility in Denver, Colorado, around Denver, Colorado area. So the database also runs in that environment as well. So all of that is installed on the virtual hardware. And the main difference is that the customer connects to that from a application database, even direct access to the server standpoint over the public internet into those virtual instances in that data center. So when you look towards the cloud deployment model, from a customer standpoint, you're still going to essentially connect to the same way, which is make that internet connection from your location over the internet securely to the facility. You're pointing instead of at the co-location facility now at the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, but those are all remote resources, meaning that none of them are resident within your library system locally. Just the workstations, tablets, mobile devices, whatever that you use to access those. So hopefully that kind of clears that up a little bit. And to address some of the benefits, and I'm kind of a closet operational risk manager kind of guy. One big thing that this affords us over initially managing those co-location facilities is if we want to provide geographic redundancy to our customers, in order to do that with the co-location facilities, we have to manage a number of co-location facilities separately in these different regions. And there's, naturally there's some complexities to that. So one advantage of moving to the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure platform is we immediately get access to all the data regions they offer, and there's no difference between the implementation, right? So if we're dealing with a data center provider, East Coast, West Coast, Canada, Southeast Asia, wherever we're going, a lot of those are operated by different companies, and there's variations in the operating environment there, and that creates complexity for us in terms of managing it. Whereas we get the exact same configuration, deployment model, network and hardware performance in all regions globally with this deal. So that really opens up what we can offer in terms of geographic redundancy, multiple locations, and even just market access. So if you think about historically a customer who wants to use our solution out of a region that would need to connect to either the Ashburn or Denver data center, they may be gated to some degree by just the network latency for those requests there. So being able as the provider to move that network endpoint closer to the customer, right? So the West Coast customer hits the West Coast, East Coast customer hits the East Coast, naturally provides a huge benefit there. So those are two things that just open up for us in terms of the data region. And then without getting into like very nerdy details, another huge benefit is we've talked quite a bit about performance. The application performance based on the Oracle expertise and how much that platform is developed should open up some performance benefits for us to take advantage of scalability and improve client performance in that environment as well. And a lot of that, varies depending on what part of the application and the workload and latency and things like that. But as part of our evaluation process, we saw some very nice performance improvements on that platform that we think people will appreciate. We had some lovely side-by-side speed tests for people who are on the nerdy end like me that were quite fun.
I'd like to offer a few other, another point to that latest question from the audience, in addition to what DZ stressed, that for us as a company, it also, as DZ mentioned, we were running 2 colo facilities, which are effectively hosting facilities, as you would know them, in all intents and purposes. And that was the AT&T facility in Northern Virginia, Ashburn, and then the Zayo facility outside of Denver, and for those clients, et cetera. So we were managing 2 colo facilities. We are consolidating both both of those ILS platforms in the cloud into one type of organization where we manage that. And furthermore, specifically, some of the benefits over our existing hosting environment to where we're moving is data at rest encryption, multiple levels of disaster recovery options. As DZ has said many times, we can back up data across available domains, again, as a different backup process. So it gives us a lot more flexibility, a lot more options depending on the library or customers' needs in terms of redundancy and disaster recovery. And we no longer have to worry about, do we have the latest, greatest processor? How old is our hard drives? With Oracle, our customers will always be using and leveraging the latest and greatest in solid state drives or storage or processing or compute. We no longer have to go through the budgetary refresh cycle of hardware. We leverage the power and scalability of Oracle Cloud, which they are incentivized as a business unit to always provide and to keep that hardware at its optimized state and to stay abreast at the leading edge of performance in technology, storage, and computing.
And yeah, if I could add to that as well, another excellent audience question here I think can weave in is migrating all hosted customers to the new OCI platform. You're asking so many good questions here that the one I was looking at scrolled down. What specific advantages does this give our customers, and especially versus competitors? So, you know, this obviously, we could spend probably an entire webinar on this, and there's not sufficient time to do that, but there's a number of our competitors that are still in the business of operating their own data center. And one advantage that this really gives us is because we're partnering with Oracle in the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, which is being used by some of their massive enterprise clients with very demanding security requirements, we benefit from that indirectly in that we get to take our very secure application environment and deploy that into a platform that is managed with the security needs at a baseline that Oracle is responsible for providing everyone who uses that infrastructure. And so, we feel like that gives us a very credible, very scalable, very knowledgeable, and very committed partner in making sure that the entire ecosystem is not just, as John said, performant, but also very secure. And I think that puts us in that specific area, which is one that I think about a lot, in a great position versus other companies, principally library companies, who are continuing to operate those proprietary data centers, who then have to match somebody like Oracle's expertise from a security standpoint to keep the environment in the in the state that we really require to keep our customers secure. So that's one big thing, kind of on the back end, the technology side, that we think is a pretty big advantage for us of having a partner of that size and scale.
So at this point, I want to jump in really quickly. We are at 3:29. I did say we were going to try and keep it at a half hour. I would like to keep going and go a little bit longer than 3:30. I mean, it's my session, so I would like it to keep going. Are you guys available? Or are you guys good if we keep going and stay later? Excellent. Yeah. And I also do want to point out that DZ has jumped in and answered a few questions as they've come in. Other people have also sent in some questions. We are going to come back to this content, but I kind of want to push the ball downfield a little bit. We will circle back and we will answer those questions a little bit later in the session. So DZ, you're on a roll right now, so I'm going to stick with you on this. We've spent a lot of time talking about OCI up to this point and basically how it's affecting TLC's product users. But TLC, in a way, is going to be a customer of our own TLC Cloud Services in this initiative. So could you talk a little bit about how TLC operationally itself is affected by the move to OCI?
Yep, great question. So as part of this evaluation process, another thing that we always think is prudent to do is to use the platform ourselves in a not a customer production capacity, but very much a critical capacity internal, to obviously shake out any kinds of issues, all the normal things you would want to do, but also make sure that we're comfortable with the communication, the vendor partnership, the resources before we go in that direction. So you know, we're talking about this now, but we've actually been very much in cycle for a long period of time in adopting this platform internally to power some of our development and product management workflows. And this is the classic eat your own dog food example, which is, you know, we get to this point and we've spent a very significant amount of time building new releases of library.solution and working on deployment automation, build automation that actually runs on ephemeral cloud instances on the OCI platform. So, you know, we go into this very experienced and also very confident in the underlying platform. And you get to know, you know, rest assured that we have used this extensively and put it through the paces. And, you know, that's something I would really expect of anyone if I were going to move in that direction. And that's, you know, that's very similar to with the co-location facility. Not only do we run customer services out of there, but we have sort of segregated instances where we run some of our own services out of there. And that's a healthy practice in terms of making sure that you know, can meet your own needs, solve your own problems, work through all the operational processes before you go fully in that direction. So, and that's been great for the team too, because one advantage of that, you know, we talked about the hardware acquisition cycles, capacity planning, et cetera. We really get to defer that because the capacity is, for all intents and purposes, unlimited for us, and it's really more of a kind of run rate management process. So it's also provided us some efficiencies in the development cycle where we need excess capacity that, you know, comes up off cycle and we don't necessarily have the hardware acquisition plan. We can spin up those instances, operate them, and tear them down without consuming any of our internal server capacity. So it's been a great experience for our teams as well, and let us really do some cool process stuff internal and in development of these products before we even get to the hosting side of things.
Excellent. Now, John, we had an attendee question come in that I'm actually going to piggyback my question off of. And someone had sent in the question, so we wouldn't need a server for data or web in our building if we went with hosted. So let me ask you this. What kind of difference can library customers see when switching from an on-premise solution to a hosted solution with TLC Cloud Services?
That's a great question. I would ask first how good your relationship is with your IT support on-prem. And that would be one of the, you know, meaningful impacts that happen immediately that I feel would have immediacy to you as a library coordinator, manager, director, or whatever your role is in the library, is that you offload that responsibility for all of the hardware, for all of the OS maintenance, for all of the updating, for the budgetary cycles that you're going to have to accommodate every 5 to 8 years to refresh that hardware within your local municipality budgetary process. That all gets offloaded, you know, and taken off your plate, and you're no longer responsible for that. Disaster recovery, backups, and again, the overall general maintenance of that hardware stack. When you're on-prem, even though we provide full services here through our client services, there is still a level of liability you hold in housing that hardware in your facility. We have, you know, over 700 contracts representing 5,500 libraries in North America, many of which are centered around the Gulf of Mexico, which frequently experience natural disaster-related weather events. We have worked with customers who literally had to use stacks of books from the shelves to get their equipment up off the floor because the water was rising. It takes all of that away. It takes all of the time that you may spend administering, maintaining, troubleshooting that server, web server, data server, firewall, all of that is removed. And so libraries can spend more time doing the things you want to do versus tending to black boxes in your closet. And I think that the efficiency libraries gain through this and the mental relief probably that they gain is worth any type of premium. And there is a slight premium, of course, you know, to go from an on-prem to a host or cloud model, whereas you spread that cost over time through a small increase yearly versus that big hit on a 5 to 8 year rolling budgetary schedule where you have to really replace that hardware and or continually, go after that extended warranty, which we all know, extended warranties are great when you need them, but they're not the answer, and eventually you have to tackle that budgetary cycle in due course, and it really alleviates that and makes it easier to budget and allows librarians and even respective IT professionals within the library that you employ focus on things that have more direct impact on your clients, which are your customers, your patrons, than maintaining an ILS system.
If I could add to that as well, real quick, Jameson, I think a really good way to think about moving from on-premise to the hosted model is, John really described a lot of the stuff that you're traditionally responsible for. You really put yourself, and I'm simplifying it a bit here, but it's pretty true that you put yourself in a position of you need to be able to maintain a sufficient internet connection to connect to your server, and that's it. You largely hand over the responsibility of everything else from an IT infrastructure standpoint to TLC. And so, the benefits of that vary depending on, as John said, how much IT resource expertise you have. But it has been for a while, and it continues to get increasingly harder to keep up with, information security requirements, the evolving threat landscape there. The pace of change of hardware and software requirements over time has, not shown any sign of decelerating. And so, there's a lot of expertise that we have in managing those things and bringing the Oracle partnership into that as well. That frankly, without demeaning the resources available to anyone, we just have more of that by nature of what we do. And that varies customer to customer by how relevant that is. But John mentioned some of those kind of geographic disaster scenarios where we've done a ton of work moving to people to host it and helping them rescue kind of the state of their systems from being kind of overcommitted to on-premise. We've done a similar thing and you may have seen some of the kind of case studies that we've put out, some similar things with some customers who managed on-premise, had a security issue related not to our system, but to their network that, ultimately affects everything on-premise. And we've, gone through the process of sort of rescuing them, if you will, and rushing them into a hosted model where our capacity to protect those systems is just better than the resources they have available by nature of the, the size of our company versus the size of the library resources. So those are all the kinds of things that you really get to offload and to be simplistic again. If your internet is working and your bandwidth is good enough to get to those servers with low latency, you're largely done at that point, and you focus on the management of, the library and your policies and workflow.
Right. And if I could piggyback on that real quick, I will say, talking about, I know it started with disaster, and now we're talking a little bit about performance. So this looks like a good way for me to work this in. From a disaster recovery, we all know that fear of flood, fear of fire, and what to do in that scenario. But we are now living in the time of COVID-19, right, which is a completely different kind of disaster on another scale that we're all working with. And we moved a customer from on-prem into OCI, and a sentiment that was shared with us was, it was nice knowing that because folks are outside of the library and they're hitting the library with having to see ebooks and pack searches and things like that, it's nice knowing that that traffic is hitting a dedicated OCI environment as opposed to having to work through the library's own network and network resources in order to get to that. So from a performance standpoint, that's been very key. John, if I can follow up real quick with a question that just came in. So does this mean that the on-premise model will be phased out? At what point will TLC clients be required to move to cloud?
Well, this is a great company to work for many reasons. It's also frustrating for many reasons because we hold true to our word, and we still are supporting a few clients that pay maintenance on a system that is 20 plus years old. We will never tell our client when they have to move from on-prem to hosted. We don't force our customers to upgrade, and I'll dovetail back into the point I wanted to raise over on the previous question, which is another tangible benefit to our clients, which is we can develop software now faster than your hardware can keep up with. So if you're on-prem, and we see this within our hundreds and thousands of libraries, hundreds of individual servers out there, that many libraries are held hostage to a version because they can't get new hardware budgeted for their library. And so as our web-based applications continue, we continually, develop those and bring more modern technologies in them. Sometimes you get stuck at a certain version because the hardware requirements exceed your current capacity. You can't get a budget through your municipal agency to get those servers upgraded. So you're stuck in time. We as an organization have to develop to the lowest common denominator. We have to take into context these older antiquated systems as we develop new features, which doesn't withhold development, but certainly it's another lens in which you view things as you're developing and trying to bring in newer, more innovative technologies into the platform. So, and in terms of upgrade, when you're in a hosted environment, it is a quicker turnaround on upgrades. We can leverage the scalability and power of that environment to push the upgrade through faster, as witnessed by LAPL and some of the comments Matt's made there, since they've gone from an on-prem to a Oracle Cloud environment in the CarlX system there at LA. But there is tangible benefits. You get upgraded quicker, you're up to the head of the queue versus trying to coordinate an on-prem upgrade. And you can always rest assured, will always be able to take the latest and greatest upgrade from TLC, depending on your schedule, of course. We don't dictate when you take an upgrade, but you'll never be withheld back because of your current hardware specs in your library. And that's an important point as well.
Can I add to that a little bit, John?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, another, to reiterate that, obviously in working with this platform, there's new capabilities that we're looking to take advantage of. But we're approaching everything from a backwards compatibility standpoint, as John said, to maintain that on-premise capability. Some of those benefits, will be new benefits in the cloud that just don't apply in the on-premise deployment model. Some of them may be improvements that have benefits in both cases. But we are maintaining that compatibility with the on-premise deployment. And part of that as well is because we support clients who, for a variety of reasons, the type of business they do, really don't have an option to not do an on-premise deployment. Right. And, we're not, as John said, we're not cutting them off. So, that's one of the great things I like about TLC is, always be suspicious of companies saying we're all one big family, but we really do put a lot of effort into to making sure that we meet our library's needs. And this is one area where, we're going the extra mile to make sure that we don't break that on-premise compatibility.
DZ, if I can, just real quick, I only have a few more questions. The one thing I do want to kind of pivot away from disaster recovery. I know we spent a lot of time talking about disaster recovery. Security is always a concern, I think, for a lot of our customers. I think of a lot of the implementations I did with library.solutions for schools, and everyone has patron privacy concerns. Student data privacy is always a major concern as well. Can you talk a little bit about the security benefits of OCI?
Sure, yeah, and one of the main benefits that John already highlighted is from both the standpoint of data at rest as well as the Oracle database. OCI has extremely strong encryption and data separation built into that model. This is common of a lot of cloud platforms, but one thing, if you look into it, that Oracle has a unique advantage of is Oracle Transparent Data Encryption, which is specifically an Oracle database encryption technology. And that is essentially woven into the fabric of that platform. So customers we deploy in that environment automatically benefit with basically no performance cost from the data at rest and the database layer encryption. So that is a huge step forward. On top of that, our network security in the co-location facility is quite good. And obviously the network infrastructure that the companies that provide those facilities and lease those out to companies like TLC have a huge amount of expertise there. But that's, again, an area where the scale and capability of Oracle just exceeds what any one given local database data center provider can accomplish. So we're really taking our kind of excellent application security and practices and putting that into an environment that's wrapped around the entire OCI security apparatus, and have a very strong partner there as well. So those are some of the obvious and immediate benefits. And I don't want to get too long-winded on this, but obviously in planning out the architecture, a lot of work goes into making sure from both a privacy and security standpoint that we deploy things in such a way that there is an intense amount of logical and security separation between any given customer instances. That's another area where there's a ton of that just built into the underlying infrastructure because customers of OCI demand that the same way we do. And on top of that, the way we deploy compartments, affinity groups for customers, and the way we architect the connectivity between services in that environment is very much focused around ensuring the appropriate levels of data segregation on top of all of the encryption and network security advantages afforded there. And then, physical security to the data centers as well. The OCI physical security is on par or exceeds in all locations that we reviewed the physical security we can offer at the co-location facility now, which is already quite impressive. Okay, I have a question from the attendees. Someone submitted this question. There's multi parts to it, and the final questions that have come in. So I'm going to freely admit this is going to be a toss-up between the two of you, and we'll take the tug of war who wants to answer this from there. Hi, we are currently a hosted TLC client. Are you migrating all hosted clients to the new OCI platform? Any expected downtime? And the last part, how will this affect pricing for renewals?
Oh, I think I'll take the first stab at that, DZ.
Sure.
Yeah, ideally, our long tail plan is to migrate our clients out of our current colo facility into Oracle Cloud. And there is no deadline to that. There is no end of life. We're not going to start as soon as this webinar ends, issue communication to our hosted customers with expected times of response and timelines where you can upgrade. That is not happening. We feel there's enough incentive for our customers to look at it, to look at the benefits from moving from OCI, that through that process and reaching out to those clients and really going through their needs during the renewal process and upgrade process too. This isn't just a mass exodus. Hey, throw your hand up, I'm ready to move. This will be a strategic type of a process where you enter the upgrade funnel, and we will approach you about whether or not you would like to consider this move to OCI and so forth. So it's not a free for all, get in line, so to speak, to get migrated to OCI. It is a measured, deliberate, and strategic move away from our current colo facility into the Oracle Cloud. We will work within existing library schedules. The downtime would be no more than, and DZ can correct me on this, and if he does, that's fine, than what you would normally anticipate in terms of a large system upgrade. And it will be very measured and deliberate in the way that we approach this. In terms of renewals, that is the time when we would typically, if you have not reached out and expressed interest to move to the cloud, we would be proactively contacting you prior to that upgrade and renewal, and inquiring about your potential ability to move to the cloud. As another measure, so to speak, we are, for clients that are who have existing contracts that may be renewing or extending those contracts with us, we are cognizant if they're an existing hosted customer and they want to do a renewal 3 or 5 year contract, we are cognizant of that transition within that time span potentially, and working with the client to structure that renewal contract to accommodate that if that's a direction they would choose to move towards. But we feel that the incentives, the benefits, to the end user are going to organically incentivize both on-prem and existing hosted customers to seriously consider the OCI model.
Yep, and I'll kind of pick up a little bit on the sort of downtime and what that transition experience looks like. The context of the question was from the standpoint of a hosted client, so I'm gonna kind of start there. The transition from the current hosting solution to an OCI-based hosting, if you choose to go in that direction, is pretty much kind of a standard maintenance window. There is downtime required because we do have to do transformation of your current transactional data state into that environment. So there's the actual, as John said, it's not a very complicated process on our end in terms of software configuration, things like that. The majority of that is really scheduling a convenient time to stop the services, make sure you have a clean transaction state, transfer that into the new environment, stand it up, do your evaluation, and then proceed. And we kind of do it that way as well, because if you run into any kind of unexpected issues, which we do as much work as possible to mitigate in the new environment, we can just roll back and start you up again with the last known good transaction state in the previous hosted environment. So that's a little bit about how kind of the process works. But yeah, we would schedule a window for that, and we typically do those nights, weekends, working around your schedule with our operations team to make sure we minimize impact to your kind of library operating hours and service to your students, communities, et cetera. I'm not really going to go into detail in terms of how that works going from on-premise to hosted. That the experience of going from on-premise to the colo-based hosting solution versus the TLC Cloud Services will actually not change all that much. I think that's a little bit out of the scope for the conversation here. That tends to be a little bit more complex, basically because when you go from on-premise to any kind of hosted for the first time, you typically have more work in terms of configuration, network testing, et cetera, than if you go from hosted here to hosted over here. So the on-premise to hosted is a bit more of a process. But that said, if you're in that boat and considering that as well, we are very good at that and have a very good process and a very high success rate with that. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that. And moving into hosted in general is a good process for really making the changes necessary to your network to take advantage of all kinds of other hosted services that may impact your library IT, et cetera. So you get some benefits, some side benefits from that process as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think and this is my own internal opinion, we kind of took the SpaceX approach into this, and our first on-prem to OCI migration was Los Angeles Public Library. So, I think, speaking to Matt and the crew there and the testimonials that you may see from them and quotes on our different marketing materials will attest to the job and work we did for LAPL and moving from an on-prem into OCI. And along those same lines, from the Carl X customer base, LAPL was the first, Somerset was the second. And so we kind of bookended, with those, with that particular platform, both ends of the size spectrum. We had our pretty much our largest Carl X client go first, and then we went to the other end of the scale with Somerset and brought them in. And I think even more importantly, and I won't say by name, but we recently had another Carl X client who had the option of going from an on-prem to a city managed and provided AWS cloud. They reached out to us and expressed, hey, this is what we're considering doing. And just at this time, OCI was coming online. It was still in its infancy, but we gave them the OCI model to consider. They re-engaged us on that, and through a couple of really good discussions with their team, in the end, they chose to not only pay the premium financially, but also take a little more responsibility, where the easy path may have been to go with everyone else in their city to go towards AWS. They chose to go alone with TLC with their library system to Oracle Cloud. And I think, and that was something where, and again, I wasn't privy to that part of the decision, of course, and I don't want to presume what happened there, but to me, I think that, it's a really good testament to what we're offering when you have a client like that was a long tenured client who trusts TLC to manage our system better than their resources potentially could have in a different cloud environment. And I believe it would have been probably financially more accommodating to go with the city. They chose to strike it out and go with TLC in the Oracle Cloud versus the AWS, along with the rest of the different systems in their city. So I think that one's really good, and that one's actually going to be based out of Australia domain. So we are deploying around the world now in OCI, and of course for our Asian clients, we have a Singapore domain coming online within 6 months or so based on latest guidance from OCI.
Fellas, I have 2 questions left, one from an attendee and one from myself, and I would like to see if we can cap this at 4 o'clock. So we've got 5 minutes to try and get these 2 questions. Justin, I'm going to actually pose this one to you. And I'm actually going to add a little conjecture in this question just because I'm fairly confident that Maureen is a library.solution customer, not a Carl. And I'm not sure if they're still in the 4 generation or the library.solution 5 generation, and if in 5, which version. So the question is, are you required to have the latest software version in order to go into the cloud product? They're waiting for feature development for a subsequent release, and they aren't sure if they would need to be on the most recent version in order to go into OCI.
Okay, yeah, that is a great question, and I will say on this that the answer is probably more complicated than we can do in 4 minutes. So I'll do like a high level guidance on that, and Maureen.
Actually, 2 minutes because I still have a question for John.
Oh no, okay, I'll do it real fast. Maureen, my contact information is available. Feel free to reach out, and I can give you a much more tailored answer. Generally speaking, we are supporting the 4 and 5 versions in this environment. This is completely transparent from a customer standpoint. It all goes to how we manage it internally, affinity groups, et cetera. We are supporting both of those major product versions. Within those versions, there may be a minimum version within the major product line, if that makes sense. So a current 4x version, a current 5x version for library.solution that will be the sort of initial compatibility version with that environment. And that has to do with a lot of things like ensuring the greatest level of security and some of the architectural changes as far as our roadmap goes. So so it's more of depends on what 5x version, but if you're talking 4x versus 5x, we will accommodate both of those in the environment. I regret to inform you, if you are a 3x customer, relying on the desktop client applications, we will likely not be providing cloud hosting for the 3x generation, which, as John stated, is almost as old as I am. No, not really.
Maureen, I will say, when it comes to emailing Justin, this is one of those times where Dualzonizer versus DZ becomes very convenient for all of us. It's JustinDZ@tlcdelivers.com would be the way that
so
I
would, I'm sure we could have a much more useful to you, very specific discussion about the details. So drop me a line, sure, and I'll give you like very tailored guidance to your situation as best I can.
Last question, John. You have about 2 minutes. Let's talk about other implications when it comes to OCI for us. What are some potential future opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, we've really, I think, and I'm sorry you cut out there, but we've really framed our discussion around ILS platforms. I opened up with kind of the data services aspect, and so I'll kind of circle back to there as we end the conversation. TLC does more than just ILS systems. The first 25 years of our existence was really predicated upon data services and in catalogs. Before they became integrated, we had CD-based library. Up in the Oracle Cloud. I think as TLC evolves and continues to develop, newer, more innovative, and more, high performance hardware dependent systems and technologies, we really want to take advantage of, where we can, the scalability that Oracle Cloud offers. And so, be on the lookout for new products coming from TLC based on Oracle Cloud. Be on the lookout for existing products to be modernized in that environment, like our ITSMark data service. And I think that as an organization at large, we are going to benefit from this, and our consumers and clients are going to benefit from this in meaningful ways. And as we strive to do in this era, when wasn't the era of budgetary contraction in libraries? It seems like, having been in it 20 years, it's the era of the Y2K LSTA grants are no longer with us. So you know, we want to provide that ROI for our clients. We know that every dollar that you budget towards our company, we want to provide you meaningful ROI for that. And this is the next step in continuing delivering that return on your investment via TLC. And that is partnering with a world-class organization delivering the highest performance cloud-based systems on the planet. You know, all of us hear about AWS going down 2 to 3 times a year. When's the last time you've recognized an Oracle Cloud going down? So we're very excited about this. It's a big strategic intent for the company. It will deliver meaningful benefits to our end users and to our internal workforce. And so it's a win-win for us. And therefore, it's a win-win for our clients and customers.
Gentlemen, I would like to thank you both very much for taking part in today's webinar. I know we said we were going to try to keep this conversation at a half hour, but as you all have spent a career in conversations with me, you know there is no such thing as a short conversation. So I do appreciate you all sticking with us. And for everybody that was an attendee on the session, thank you very much for taking part in this and listening in and for your questions. This was very great for all of us as panelists, as well as a company to hear your feedback and for us to be able to provide this to you. There will be a recording of this posted later, I would expect tomorrow. You'll notice that if you have been to the TLC webinars page, you'll notice there is no further session scheduled right now. We are currently, with the marketing team at TLC, is currently negotiating with some of our content providers to get a schedule up and running and get a couple of more sessions up here for you in the next coming week. So stay tuned for there. Thank you all very much again for taking part in this. Please, everyone, continue to stay safe. Stay healthy, continue to wash your hands, and we at TLC have been masking up. Looks like John's masked up right now. I hope you all are doing.
Wear your masks.
Wear your masks. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.